recorded live at Town Hall here at Miller Measurements. This is AE Squared. So about 10 years ago, a book came out that I loved. It was called The Millionaire Next Door. It was written by a guy named Tom Stanley. If you haven't read it, pick it up. It's a fascinating read. Tonight, we have a guest that, I swear, it's like he was right from the pages of that book. So tonight, you're going to meet a self-made person who's built a company from a welder and a pickup truck. But before I introduce you to tonight's guest, I do want to share with you, here's the latest going on here at Hiller Measurements.
So check this out, we're here at Premier Technology. An amazing family owns and operates this building right here. They house 400 employees. It's an amazing manufacturing facility. They're in the food industry, they're in the nuclear industry, the government, all of it. They do big things here. And one of the most important things in their world, they're all about automation, they're all about technology. And with that technology, they still employ 400 employees right here in this small town. And I'm excited to be here, all right? So let's go check this place out.
Before we started this company, we were professional hunters and outfitters, and you can't make a living doing that year round. So in the off season, I'd do some welding, and it occurred to me that there was room for a business that was operated differently, and that was the foundation of the company, and that was back in 1996. We had a couple guys, a welder and a pickup, and right now we're almost 400 employees. We use the most modern equipment and techniques, and so my wife is the CEO and CFO, and it truly is a woman-run and woman-owned business. The majority of our family works here with us. If you're going to be successful in this industry, it's competitive and it's tough. You're going to have to be on the cutting edge, and the key to training your employees is an academy, just like Titan's put together. The fastest way you can get them trained and get them productive is by using that academy.
And we're back. Doug Sayer. Doug Sayer has built Premier Technology. It's a metal fabrication company, big, from a pickup truck and a welder to a large-scale operation today with over 300 employees in under 20 years from Blackfoot, Idaho. And tonight, we're all blessed to hear Doug tell the story about how he did it. Doug, welcome to AE Squared. Good to have you. Good to have you. So Doug, let's go back before Premier. I want to hear the truck and the welder story. Actually, before you had the welder. Tell me a little bit about how you grew up and ended up with a truck and a welder.
Well, it's a long story, but it's an interesting one. You know, I grew up in Wisconsin and spent a lot of time outdoors and enjoyed doing everything outdoors, hunting and fishing and recreating. So my grandparents had a ranch in Idaho, and I had the opportunity to go out and spend the time with my grandparents, helping them on the ranch. And I guess some measure of what my parents thought of me, they sent me out there on my motorcycle when I was 17.
No kidding. Yeah. Boy, that was a different time.
$50, no cell phone, and just headed all the way out to Idaho. So when I was in Idaho, I actually met a young lady, and she turned out to be my wife, and we've been married 37 years.
Congratulations.
So she's an important part of the business. Right now, she's the CEO and the CFO.
Yep.
And I guess that's part of the important part of the story is, you know, we got married right out of high school and took a job in the food processing industry. Started out as a laborer, sweeping floors, and worked my way up through the maintenance programs. And that's where I learned how to weld, was in the maintenance department. So we did that for 10 or 12 years, but I hated it. It drove me crazy.
So you're fixing like food chutes and conveyors, things of that sort.
Yeah, and it was a way to provide for our family, but that whole wanting to be outside and doing that kind of thing. So that's when we started our first company. It was an outfitting business where we took people on hunts and did, trail rides and that. And so I was happy. Mm-hmm. I was in the outdoors and I was excited to be doing it, but that's a poor way to make a living.
So was that You just wanted to be outdoors, or was the entrepreneurial bug in you from right then? Was it also, well, let's ask you a different way. Are you a very good employee?
No.
No, okay.
In fact, I tell the guys that work for me, I had to start my own business because I'd get fired for showing up late if I worked for somebody else.
I
But-
know that feeling. Yeah.
So, you know, that was the time for me. And I thought if you could take something that you loved and be an entrepreneur and own your own business, that would be ideal. So that was a target for me. But when we were doing that, I realized that you can't, provide for your family because that's not year-round steady work.
Right.
You're not carrying a lunchbox and punching a clock. It's pretty tough. So in the off-season, I do work for different companies, much like our company today, just as a contract employee and was just doing some welding.
Right.
So, that's when I realized that, participating in those other companies, that there was room in the marketplace for a company that did things different.
Different. So, welding, what did you see different that you could be doing at that point? What was different? I'm curious.
Well, it's not the processes,
Yeah.
but it was the relationship that you had with your customers, the relationship you had with your employees,
Right.
those kind of things.
Right.
So, I had a mentor that I'd met on a hunting trip. He's actually from Texas. He's from Waco. And, he coached me along that whole week that we were together. Because they were self-made guys. And I was trying to figure out, what makes them different? How come they were so successful, he and his friends?
Right.
And so we'd sit around the fire, and I'd ask him questions. And at the end of the trip, he said, I could write you $1 million check, or you could come down to my ranch, and I'll teach you how to make them over and over again. So I borrowed $800 from my mom, and we flew our family down there and spent Thanksgiving on his ranch. And he's the one that kind of spurred me and
Right.
coached me
Right.
on how to do it. And so,
So, can you share with our audience the cliff notes of what you learned at the ranch?
I might be able to. So, that was one of the things that you have to have is a burning desire.
Right.
And I clearly did. We start out and you take a piece of paper and you draw a line down the middle and you write down on the left-hand side all those things that you're willing to give up to have a successful business.
Right.
On the right hand, those things that you're not willing to give up. And he handed me the notebook and he said, now write them down. Well, it's easy for me and it was quick. On the left-hand side, everything.
Everything.
I was willing to, everything. What I wasn't willing to give up was my family.
Your family.
So, yeah.
Not a bad thing. So, in your experience looking back, how much of that on the left side of that column you ended up giving up along the way?
A lot.
A lot.
Yep.
But that's, any regrets? Is
None.
that-
No. That's, you can't teach that stuff in school.
Right.
But when you make a sacrifice like that,
Yeah.
and that's where the value in owning a business and making a difference comes from.
So in the end, that when you were there at the ranch, the making multiple millions, the answer to that at the core was start a company. That was the message, right? That's the machine.
Yeah. The trick is, what made Walt Disney successful?
Well, you tell me.
Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse.
He had a
okay.
Mickey Mouse, right? So the other part of the equation is you have to have specialized knowledge.
Right.
So literally for 2 years, I ran around and invented different things and really invented stuff, trying
Right.
to figure out what my Mickey Mouse was. And then one day I was driving to a welding job, and it occurred to me, Clifton knew all along what my specialized knowledge was. He just wanted me to go spend 2 years trying to figure, so I'd learned myself.
Right.
It was the welding.
It was welding.
So, yeah.
So that brings us to the pickup truck, right? So you got the welder and the pickup truck. You go, aha, I'm going to start a business welding.
Yep, took all the money from our trips that fall.
Yeah.
Hired my best friend, went and got a line of credit at a welding supply store, gas
Right.
house,
Yep.
and got a few machines and
Hung a
incorporated.
shingle. So you're a welder, so you don't have any customers yet, or did you already? I mean, day one, did you have a Rolodex of people to go out and create cash flow with?
No, what I was able to do though, because of my experience in the food processing industry,
Right.
I was able to leverage those relationships.
Yeah.
And we got a few jobs and we got started and just one thing led to another, and pretty soon you have 4 employees, pretty soon you have 13, then you have 35, and then you have to build a shop, and now you're buying equipment, and then you have to bring your wife in because you need cash flow.
So, okay, now that's interesting. You had to bring your wife in because you need cash flow. There's got to be a story there. How does bring your wife in and cash flow, connect those 2 dots to me? How did she bring cash flow in that you weren't doing beforehand?
Well, when I met her, she was a waitress, and they get tips. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the reasons I was so attracted to her, because right out of the gate, she had good cash flow.
That's great. That's good. You know she's going to see this video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, when you got started and it started to grow, could you see the company you have today then? Was that on the radar screen from day one?
Yeah, it's always been there.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, early on, I believe there was going to be a nuclear renaissance. And, we haven't done a lot of that since
Right.
the 60s and 70s in the United States. And so what happened is that, those companies that used to have those certifications and accreditations to do that work, they either let them go or they went out of business.
Right.
So I believe that, if we had a company that was qualified to do that
Right.
and we were large enough,
Right.
that would be a really important market for us to be in. Because
Now, was that obvious to you because of where you're located? I mean, you're close to the Idaho National Nuclear Reservation, INEEL it used to be called, right?
Yeah.
So you were doing some work there already, or how did you connect? I mean, we were just talking about doing food work, and now we're talking about nuclear. That's a really broad breadth. Tell me how did you get into the nuclear and arrive at that niche?
Well, that was on purpose.
Okay.
And I think our proximity to the Idaho National Lab,
Right.
I think that helped me be thinking about it.
Right.
But, as you study energy specifically, and one of the other secrets to being successful is that you're in a market that has extraordinary barriers to enter.
Right.
So, anybody could go out and buy a pickup and put a welder in it and do what we had done. Mm-hmm. But to be qualified and certified to do work in the nuclear industry, that's different. Mm-hmm. So from the very beginning, we started to train our company. Even when we were just 30 employees, we were very small, second year in business. We started training them so that we were prepared to do that nuclear work. Mm-hmm. That was really important, because if you wait until you're 300 employees and you try and install a nuclear safety culture in a company that size, almost
That
impossible.
ship has sailed.
Yeah.
That ship has sailed.
So, and it took us, several years and several $1 million investing in that nuclear work and the training and the accreditations before we're actually qualified to do it.
What does that look like? When you say doing nuclear work, you've got a metal working operation. What does that mean to apply your trade in the nuclear field?
From a welding and manufacturing perspective, the tools and the skill sets, those are the same.
Yeah.
The difference on the nuclear side is the quality,
Right.
quality assurance. So you're tracing your materials all the way back, to the mill and
Right.
you're welding your filler wires and filler materials. Every part has to have a pedigree, and then you have to document all of that.
Right.
And then there's, the acceptance testing and all those things. It just, when the paperwork weighs the same as the product you're building,
Right.
you're finished. Right. There's that much paper.
Yeah.
So, and it has to be that way. I mean, we can't have mistakes in the nuclear industry.
So you bring up mistakes. Now, last week, we had my partner on the show, and he made a comment in his episode where he said to young people looking to start a company that it's actually, you'll probably fail multiple times, and you need to be able to come up or get back up and go after. But it will be the failures or the mistakes that's really the education. That's where you learn what it really is going to take. So far, what we've discussed, it seems like this was an easy ride for you. But I have a feeling perhaps there was some character building along the way. Tell me something about the lessons you taught yourself along the way in building this company, or things that perhaps younger people in our audience or at home could take your wisdom and your experience and apply it towards their journey?
That's a big ask. You know, I've made so many mistakes, I can't just, narrow them down to one or two.
Right.
I think mistakes I didn't make, though, was hiring the right people, right? So when you talk about a mistake, I always tell them that you can make as many mistakes, but you can't ever make the same mistake twice. And I think, I used to tell my daughters, if you make 5 bad decisions in a row, you'll end up institutionalized or homeless.
Right.
Right? So you keep making them, but eventually you're going to have to turn around and make the right decision. There's we've had some jobs where we had problems and we ended up losing a lot of money.
Sure.
But I think no one ever got fired for doing that. In the end, the owner has to take responsibility because you're the one that trained your employees and gave them the opportunities and everything else. And if they fall down, it's probably because you haven't given them the training or the opportunities.
Right.
So, yeah, there are some stories, though. One I'll share with you. I think it's important, too. When you're dealing in business, your company needs to have a culture. It needs to have its own character. And I hope ours, I'd like to think that ours is about honesty or integrity. But we also have something that I call almost like your motto or your creed.
Sure.
And that's, we don't take advantage of others, nor will we be taken advantage of. Every once in a while, in business, people think that they can do things that aren't right. And they can get away with it just because, well, it's business.
Yeah.
And I think that's a terrible excuse. And I'll give you an example. We had a large project, several $1 million, and we were getting ready to deliver, and the customer wouldn't negotiate with us on the change orders. We're talking about $800,000 worth of changes.
Right.
And this is a big client, and I hope they're watching. So,
Okay.
so it came time to ship, and I pulled out the contract, and I went through and I looked at it really, really closely. And then we loaded up the truck, and we sent it on its way, and I called the customer and I said, well, we've done it. We've shipped.
Right.
But I didn't ship them to you. They got all upset, and I said, hey, go get all your attorneys and everybody else. You guys wouldn't negotiate fairly with us on these change orders. So
Right.
off they went, and they called me back, and I think they had 24 lawyers in there, and they were going to send me to federal prison and everything else. And I said, pull out your contract,
Right.
and let's read through it. But I said, we get down to this ship, and it says I must ship, but it doesn't say I have to ship them to an address. They wired us the money, and I called the truck driver, and I gave them the right address.
Right.
So, I just wouldn't let them take advantage of us. The funny thing is, though, every contract after that, it has a ship to address.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't make the same mistake twice
No,
either.
they don't.
Yeah. Do you find yourself having to do that very often, though? Or is it more of the, once you've had to show backbone once or twice, word gets around?
And it does, but I think, if you're fair
Yeah.
and you're honest, right, you just don't let people take advantage of you, because they will.
Yeah.
And, how would you write a check for $800,000 when it was owed to you? You got to make payroll and pay your vendors and everything else. So I think that's one of the lessons, is you need to have enough backbone that you can stand up to people, but don't take advantage of them.
I think it's one of the interesting things. I want to segue into this is your industry. When I look at yours and mine, we share something in common, which I think is an important part of your story, is there's a moat or a barrier to entry in your business, and that's the fact that it's so capital intensive, right? And so I'm curious two things. One is, how did you, in the early days, cash flow the growth, right? I've seen your facility. I've seen the expansions. What's your mindset about approaching the financial management of a growing enterprise like that? And then secondly, the follow-on question is I know it is for me, once you can understand the first thing, it becomes easier to have a backbone, like you were talking about, because your cash flow management, it's easy to have a backbone when it is, I've got to make a difficult decision because I have payroll and families that depend on my ability to provide the paychecks, right? So fundamentally, coming back, can you share with us a little bit about your mindset in those early days? You know, buying some of those first capital expense tools, was it just a good relationship with the bank, or what did that look like for you?
You know, we started the business with about $30,000 in that pickup. Mm-hmm. And that's the only capital that's ever been injected into it. So, you know, having the right banking, I think, was really important. And we were careful not to be that company that rode on the backs of our suppliers.
Right.
You know, I said earlier about, you know, bringing your wife in. Mm-hmm. Shelley actually joined the company, and the reason we did that was because of her ability to manage those kind of things. She's very, very talented. I call her the legend, mm-hmm. right? And she's always supported us. She's never turned us down when we've asked to make those capital investments.
Right.
So she's been a really strong support when it comes to that. Some people that are the CFO are, you know, they're going to want to count the beans and hold you back from making those investments. It's quite the opposite.
Right.
So what we did was, you know, she focused on having that split. So we get paid in 30, and then you try and pay, you know, 45. So that was a big piece of it. And as long as your suppliers are aware of that and they're comfortable with that, that helps. Mm-hmm. The other piece is we're in markets where we could actually get some down payments.
Right. So milestone payment structures.
Yeah.
Makes it.
And then we always had, you know, a working line of credit with mm-hmm. the bank, and we just continue to make those purchases. In fact, most of them now, you know, are made with cash. We don't actually go out and get loans. So,
man, that's a great place to be.
It is, but you know, when you have somebody that's talented like she is and can manage those finances. I don't think we've used a line of credit for the last 5 years.
That's fantastic. That's something you should be very proud of.
Well, absolutely proud of it.
Yeah.
You should probably be interviewing her, not me.
Well, there's more episodes to come. So let's talk a little bit. You've talked about the culture, and that's core to what you want to be, in integrity and not being messed with, if you will. One of the things that we want to do, part of the reason why we named this show Artists, Engineers, and Entrepreneurs is that we're looking to find the artist in the engineer and the business person in the artist, right? And oftentimes with somebody who started a company, something that can be perceived almost artistically is how they viewed their differentiation and their business model. Now, you touched on that briefly, right? You're going to do something different. You talked about relationships. Today, you're much larger. You're doing business all across the United States. You're doing commercial, you're doing DoD. What would you say really defines the uniqueness of your business model? Because this is a very, this is an industry that's a couple of centuries old. So how do you differentiate today?
You know, I've had a lot of people come in on visits and tours and, mm-hmm. and people that, you know, should be, and I've asked for advice, and they've said, you know, Doug, you need to focus on one thing. You got too many things going on. You need to do one thing and do that really well. Mm-hmm. And I get frustrated. I said, well, I do one thing. I figure out what my customer needs, and then we deliver it perfectly. Yeah. So what makes us different, and I think this is really, really important, is from the very beginning we knew that we had to be in multiple markets.
Right.
So food processing, mining, industrial, Department of Energy, commercial nuclear, we're in all of those marketplaces. And the second piece of it is when everybody was out, you know, developing a supply chain, mm-hmm. we went vertically integrated. So from engineering, design, electrical group, all the way down to fabrication, machining, and industrial coatings, it's all in one house.
It's all in one house.
Yeah. And what that does for us is it doesn't necessarily, we still have subcontractors that support us, but it gives us the opportunity to recover schedule.
Right.
If we can self-perform And we have to. We pull that stuff in and get our customer back on schedule.
Bring that all vertical. So when do you remember, was that like a decision you made objectively, we're going to go vertical when everyone else is outsourcing, or did that just naturally happen?
No, that was a conscious decision to do that.
Right. So that's interesting because that's also something that is just plain and obvious in the mindset of Elon Musk and his companies. Same thing. It's when everyone else is outsourcing and building that supply chain, you cannot see in a SpaceX or a Tesla the same type of behavior. It is a very vertical and catches a lot of negativity for doing that. But it does give you control.
It does give you control. And honestly, I'm not sure that would have been successful had we gone a different route.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Idaho market, let's talk about Idaho for a second, because this is an interesting discussion. We're going a little bit off my question and answer, but I do want to ask you a couple of questions about Idaho. Idaho is, it seems like it's an area that's, it's not California, thank goodness, right? But it's also not Wyoming, where it's focused on one industry, even though Idaho's known for potatoes, right? But there's a lot of industries. When you look at Idaho, first the obvious question. Here you are, you've built this large company, and forgive me, but I have to point this out. You did this, you employ a bunch of engineers. You're in a very technically centric industry. You know where I'm going with this. You didn't go to college.
No, I didn't.
So here's the question. This is fascinating. I have 4 kids. I'm asking myself the question. You sit with your kids today and they say, Dad, I want to do what you did. Does getting a college education necessarily play into that game plan today in your mind? Is it necessary?
Oh, I think it helps. I spent more time explaining why I don't have a degree than it would have taken to get one.
Does anybody care anymore when you talk to people, though? Honestly.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
After the company was doing well, my father said, why don't you take some time and go back and get your degree? It clearly was important to him.
Right.
And he wasn't too happy with my response because I said, well, if I needed a degree, I'd just hire 3 more.
That is, right there, that is a statement of profundity that needs to be repeated. Say that one more time.
So if I needed another engineering degree, I'd just go hire it.
That is something we need to remember, is that that's the beauty of the entrepreneur, is that instead of spending the debt in the 6 years, you just create the engine to employ them. I don't think that gets enough press. When we sit here and have this discussion, I wish that we had the blessing for you and I to sit and have a drink with Mike Rowe. Are you familiar with Mike Rowe?
I am, yeah.
Right? And what he's doing with Mike Rowe works. It seems like what you're doing is so coherently aligned with the ethos of what he's trying to do in the trades and the skills and what you're teaching and the value in that work, that I don't think that gets near enough credit in today's market. Getting the college education just sucks all the air out of the room as far as what we tell our kids. And yet you sit here as an example that is quite counter.
Well, I really don't think that the college experience helps. I mean, it might for some, but if you're going to be successful, you have to have specialized knowledge.
Right.
So you can either learn it in school, in college.
Right.
You can rent it, you can buy it, you can hire it, but that doesn't require you to go to college.
Right.
So if you have the right life experiences and you have that burning desire to figure it out, and you're not afraid of making mistakes, then I'd skip school. You
ever thought what needs to happen, either in a more general sense, or what people like yourself, myself, can be doing to share that burning fire more, to create more desire to build and create instead of get a good job? You ever thought about that?
I've thought about it a lot. I don't know. I'm not sure that you can train a burning desire, right?
Good point.
I think it's something that you either have or you don't. And then,
Right.
and you have to have an enormous stomach for risk.
Mm-hmm.
Our family, we started out in a 14 by 70 mobile home.
Yep.
wasn't that bad.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
so if you lost everything tomorrow, would you be okay?
There's another single wide out there somewhere.
Yeah, you just start over.
Right. Yeah, you know, though, it seems like we overblow the risk because that fact right there says, well, maybe we should look at that startup risk in its proper light. And the other thing from a benefit is that you started younger, right? Which is the right time to do it,
Yeah.
right? Had you had your daughters and they were, you know, and they're much older, it might have been the risk equation may have looked a little different.
I don't know, 30,
You think?
we started the company with 32 years old.
Yeah.
Not a lot of credibility for 32.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's a hard thing to do.
How'd you overcome that? Not a lot of credibility. You're hung a shingle.
Deliver.
Yeah.
Don't let them down.
Don't let them down.
So, I mean, go back to your question on the school.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to discourage people from doing that, but if, you know, I would discourage them from getting a perfect 4.0.
Right.
Because when somebody sends me a transcript and they have perfect grades, that tells me they don't have any social skills.
Yeah.
So, and if I get one that's a 2.0, that means that they should be in sales.
Yeah. 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 And there's value in that.
There is.
There's huge value.
But just remember, it's not the document, it's can you do the work.
Right.
So, you know, you have those credentials, and that's important, and that might help you get a little bit more money.
Right.
But in the end, whoever you're working for, if you're working for yourself, you have to be able to perform.
So you'd mentioned earlier that some of the more character building stages in your career had to do with hiring the right people. How challenging is that today in Idaho, where you're at? Finding the right people, the right talent. How do you recognize in the interview that they will do the work versus they're selling you on doing the right work? Things of that sort.
I think you just got to look, you know, at their experience that they've had, and what we're looking for is somebody that has the aptitude,
Right.
you know, and has a work ethic. You know, one of our secrets, I think, to being successful is that we are in Idaho. Some of our highest performers, they grew up on a farm or a ranch, and they know how to
Exactly.
work. You know,
I always look for the person that their resume talks about all their education, but in the grow up part, there's something about helped family in their business. That was just like, not sure I even need to interview them too deep. If they have that experience, there is some ethics and backbone there that are beat into them at an early age, so to speak.
early.
Yeah. So you've, as I got to know you and did some background on you, I've seen that there's a political story for you as well. So tell me a little bit about that. And are you involved at the state level? What is the state of politics in Idaho, and what's your role in that?
You know, Idaho, I like to say, is just one big small town.
Right.
You know, and I have a philosophy, and this is business related. So, you know, you have your customer,
Yeah.
and you have your employees, and you have the company. Everybody thinks it's like a three-legged stool, but it's not. You have your community,
Yeah.
and that community extends to, you know, not just your town or your local region, but it's your state, and, you know, even as a country.
Right.
So those are the communities that are important to me. And I don't think it's, you're not being a really good steward to your employees, to your business, or your community if you're not engaged or involved. And so I think that's why I'm involved on the political side, is so that I can make a difference.
Right.
So we can engage as a person, as a family, and as a company and make change and not just sit idly by. I always say that there's really just three kinds of people in the world.
Right.
Those that make stuff happen, those that
Watch and wonder.
and then those that say, oh my God, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's being that person that's making things happen,
Yeah.
being that company. And so that's why the involvement both at a local and at a state level.
So, local and state, what's going really well, doesn't need change, and what are the areas that do need to change from your perspective?
Well, you know, Idaho is the fastest growing state in the country. You know, we have a great environment, and
That's beautiful.
but we're also very conservative. So, you know,
Right.
Idaho has, we have a rainy day fund.
Yep.
The state's not going broke.
Run a surplus on the state level?
Yep.
Okay.
So the challenge is that we rank very low on the education side when it comes to investment per student. So we were just talking about school, right?
Yeah.
I'm a strong proponent for
Right.
education. I'm not typically a proponent for 4 or 5, 6-year degrees, but
Right.
we need to increase the investment that we have in education. Right now, the career technical
Yeah.
education is the quickest return on investment.
Right.
You can get them,
Community college,
absolutely.
the skills, the trades.
But even you're breaking it down, you really don't need a 2-year degree, because we can teach welding skills and skills that somebody can go out and make a great salary
Right.
in about 8 months. So why are we going for 2 years?
Right.
Those kinds of reform and those investments, that's what needs to happen.
So, is it a marketing thing? I mean, there are places that teach that, but the message is, and I hear Mike Rowe, right? Yeah, I mean, welding is what he talks about. If you're willing to go learn how to weld and you're willing to relocate, he says. If you're willing to do those two things, go be a welder in the Bakken up in North Dakota. It's $80,000 to $110,000 a year. I know first-year engineers don't make that out of school.
Right.
Right? So, mechanically, what is it? Is it, when you say it's investment in students, is it more schools, or is it better messaging that opportunity exists?
The investment needs to happen in the schools, but we need to change the way we're doing it.
Right.
Because the welding technology, Mike Rowe's right. If you want to learn how to weld with the stick welder and you
Yep.
want to be a pipeline welder, then, that's 1950s and 1960s technology.
Right.
Still how we do it in the pipeline industry and in the oil patch. But that's not the way.
That's not the future.
That's not the future, and that's
Right.
not the way most welding's being done today.
Right.
So, even as early as 4 years ago, I could operate most of the equipment in our facility. Today, I can't operate any of it. That's how fast the technology changes. There's no way a school system can invest in that kind of capital.
Yeah.
So you have to rethink the way we're educating, and they have to be integrated with industry, because that's where the technology is being deployed.
Interesting. So what does that look like? From an industry perspective, how do you bring industry better into education, other than, I'll be there on career day, I'll fund a student design project or something like that. What does that look like for you and I in industry, to the benefit of all in our community, but also for our businesses, to be more actively involved in the schools? What should folks like us be thinking about that we hadn't before?
Well, the model that we're using, and you do things and accomplish things because you have a desperate need. When you have that kind of leverage,
Right.
you get stuff done.
Right.
So right now, we're having a really difficult time finding enough employees. So we're 50 to 70 short right now.
So am I.
So we're training them.
Right.
And so we've come up with the internship programs and apprenticeship programs, but we're actually doing the training in our facility, and then those things that they can be educated on at the school or in the classroom.
You'll direct them to that, or?
Well, no, we actually pay them to go do that.
Ah.
So
Interesting.
we're sending them to school as a full-time employee.
Are you seeing, being that you're doing that, do you find that the community colleges, the vocational or whatnot, are they pliable in their curriculum? I mean, if you're going to send them to them, we've struggled with that, right? We've had skills, in the technical trades, but it's not taught here. Have you had any success with your schools where they will create the curriculum you need?
We're actually creating it and handing it to them.
Handing it to them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the irony of that relationship is you're providing the classroom, you're providing the students, you're providing the instructors,
Right.
all from internally. So what exactly is the school providing?
The building.
And a
And a certificate.
Yeah, that paper that really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, last question. This is a great conversation, by the way, but hopefully you and I have a chance to sit down again, whether we're on camera or not, I don't know, but let's say we get together 3 years from now. You had told me back when you started that you could see Premier what it is today. You can see that. So what are we going to talk about 3 years from now? We get there and we look back over the 3 years. What is Premier going to look like in 3 years? We've got a major election coming up, right? I think you're smart. You're in a lot of different industries, so it's like a mutual fund. One might go away, but one might pop up. But what is this entity going to be in 3 years?
We'll be larger. We're gonna continue to grow.
Right.
I speculate that we'll probably be 2.5 or 3 times the size we are right now. There's a decision point coming up,
Right.
with our NICS code, to be a small business, is 500 employees.
Yeah.
So, I think we'll bump up to that, and then we'll make a conscious decision whether we're going to graduate or whether we're going to acquire
Yeah. Interesting. Do you see yourself going into any other value streams? You talk about you're in multiple industries. You're doing welding. Technology's changing. What's the disruption in your industry that's coming that's got your attention that maybe get a vote in your strategy in the next 3 years? Is there anything on the horizon that?
I'm excited for it. I think it's going to be artificial intelligence and 3D printing.
Yeah. How does AI affect the metal business? That's an interesting one.
Well, so as we started to deploy and invest in new technologies,
Right.
and it's on the automation side of it and the repeatability, those absolutely it's going to have an effect.
So you're seeing then, if that's the case, if there's automation repeatability, then is your employment base transitioning to more of a knowledge worker type resume than it is the stick welder type thing?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a different quality
Yeah.
of the advanced material joining
Right.
instead of welding.
Right.
And being able to deploy that, you're just not going to learn that
Yeah.
out on a pipeline.
So is that something like akin to like friction stir welding in the space industry, that same type of, different type of technology? Okay, and then 3D printing. Every industry is looking at 3D printing. I'm looking at 3D. We do 3D printing. What does that look like to you? Because what you do are very large things, right? It's not making a small little widget. So what does 3D printing mean to you in your industry? What does that look like?
Well, it's that's the way of the future.
Sure.
We're evolving towards that very, very quickly. What we've done is we've taken a niche. We've looked at a gap that's in 3D printing, and I'm talking about 3D metal printing.
Yeah. So these are like the Mark Forged type companies that are in that space, whatnot. Yeah.
So what's hard is to do large prints.
Right.
And so what we're doing is we're doing the research and development on a bench scale model, but actually 3D printing inside of a vacuum. We're convinced that that's going to change the
Get better dimensional accuracies and whatnot?
right. So
Interesting.
it's an in situ process controls or quality control
Right.
as you're printing.
Yep.
That's important and everybody's concerned about. So if we can prove that we're successful on a benchtop model, our plan is to build a 1 meter.
1 meter.
Yeah, so up to 8,000 pounds in a 1 meter by a meter cube or envelope. That will be the part size that we'll be able to print. So we're not trying to print like everybody else.
Right.
We found a gap and we're focused on that gap.
Okay, that right there is your official invitation to come back in 3 years, because in 3 years, I want to put that on the floor and let's see it, because that would be fantastic. So,
We'll do it.
Doug, thanks for coming to AE Squared, sharing with our audience. I look forward to spending more time with you, and I'll see you in 3 years.
That sounds great.
All right, Doug. Good to have you here. AE Squared is a Hiller Town Hall production. Copyright 2019. AE Squared is produced by Marlena Falk. Video by Anthony Longoria. And audio by Mark Skura. Music by Brian Patterson. Want tickets to a future taping? Well, stop on by at hillermej.com/town hall. Thanks for checking out the entire episode with Doug Sayer today. You're a true AE Squared fan. Make sure we know it. Subscribe, would you? Hit that button down below. And make sure you're with us next time. We're going to bring on our first artist to the show, and that's Mrs. Pat Chapman. She's a fantastic painter. We're going to hear her story, but also the passion behind her work, her personal story, and the mission she has built around her, the gift of her oil painting. Make sure you check that episode out right here on AE Squared.